Welcome, everybody, to episode 7 of Podcana. My name is Matt Di Marco, aka Flake. I'm joined, as always, by Brendan Patrick. We're going to bring you some news, some headlines, and discuss the game of Podcana. What's up, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big episode. We are off the back of the rules which were released. I was able to play quite a bit of Lorcana. Honestly, I think I played as much Lorcana as there is to play. I played with all the cards, played all the different color combinations, was min-maxing a bit, all the good stuff. So a bunch of my friends were playing as well. For anybody listening, we played on a digital emulator, which is untap.in. Very easy to import the images and do it like that. I saw some people playing in paper, which is definitely more enjoyable, but a lot more work. So yeah, we're going to be breaking that down, breaking down the rules, and breaking down Lorcana as a game, because I think we do have enough to actually evaluate the game. It is a small card pool, but if you look at the cards that we're playing with, most of them are actually represented on the front of the boxes, on the front of the starter deck, so they are marquee key cards, it does seem. And I think we do, even if that wasn't the case, we do have enough cards to actually look into the mechanics, the gameplay, and be like, what do we think about this?
Sounds good. All right, let's rock and roll. We got the Elsa Icebreaker.
Elsa? Do you want to build a snowman?
Yeah, and so this week it's from the Polish guy, or Rich G, and they say, which of the seven dwarfs would you refuse to live with? Flake, I'll let you start this one off.
So I thought about this, and I was like, okay, the biggest hurdle was actually naming all 7.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can you name them?
Yeah, so Grumpy, Sleepy, Dopey, Bashful, Doc. I think I'm missing like 2. There's like, I don't know, like Creepy and like I don't know what the other dudes' names are. I gotta say, like, I was thinking about it, like Grumpy seems like the easiest answer, but to me, I feel like Grumpy would be the dude who would probably leave you alone the most. Sleepy seems like the one who would be, you'd have to like tiptoe around the house, and given the fact that I work from here and I'm always talking to a microphone, that could be problematic. It would probably be Bashful, like the dude who just doesn't want to bother you, like would just be like shy and just alone. The problem there would be like if you needed some sort of decisive moment from them, like, what are we eating tonight, or what movie do you want to watch? They'd be like, I don't know. I'd be like, that would get on my nerves. But I think out of all, like, I don't know what Doc does, so.
No, do I. I'll take the easy route and say Grumpy. Honestly, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to name all the 7 dwarfs just off the top there. But yeah, for like headlines, obviously gameplay, rules released, gameplay obviously follows that. We were able to play the game. We did have some new cards get released. The first is an Amethyst card, which is Yzma, Dreamboard Villain Sorcerer. It's a 2/2. It costs 2. And it can be used for a resource, which is what the sort of things around the resource mean now. So if you see the 2 and it has the, I don't know what you would call it, decoration around it, that means it can be turned into a resource for the turn. And then it says the ability is, you're excused whenever this character quests. Look at the top card of your deck, put it on either the top or the bottom of your deck, and it has 1 pip. After that, we had, well, Flake, let's get your thoughts on this card. What do you think about this card? Because I look at this card and I'm like, okay, I can, Lorcana 60 card decks, draw 7 cards, draw 1 card a turn. That's a high variance game. It is, right? We got 4 card maximum, all these other sort of rule sets. And I look at something like, top of the bottom of the deck is an ability to potentially filter. What do you think of that ability? Do you think that is powerful enough for a 2 resource, 2/2 body with 1 pip?
So we were discussing this in previous episodes where we're talking about, like, hey, there's gonna be no land system in here, so the majority of the deck, or all of the deck, frankly, are going to be playable cards for the most part. 60 cards, I don't think you'll ever get through the 60 cards. You played a lot. Like, how deep into these decks did you get?
So it really depends on the matchup. There was a couple decks. I would say it was like 2 decks where we did get down to 30-ish cards, and those were very, very long games where both players had multiple magic mirrors, which is a item that draws you cards. So I mean, those were the longest games we played by far. So getting to actual 0, I think extremely unlikely unless there is a opposing strategy that is forcing you to go that route.
So that said, cards like this I think are going to be super important for that exact reason. But the other part about this that really kind of gives me a head scratch is like the deck building restriction in this game is what, 4 copies of each?
Yep.
So the way I'm thinking about it is like, why not make it 3 copies of each and sort of shave the size of the deck down to like 50 cards, let's say. But there's got to be some sort of science or balance to this. Otherwise, ultimately, a card like this I think is important when, like you said, you're in the longer games that you've played, you only got through 50% of your actual deck, right? So having a card that can dig is super important. It's not necessarily discarding. It's just, looking, it's sort of opting or scrying for cards that you want. I think that's a very important mechanic in a game that on the outliers are you'll see 50% of your deck.
Yeah, so my experience with this card is it's actually one of the worst cards I played with by far, and it's for a couple of reasons which are important to note. First of all, it's 1 pip, so it's going to be two resources for a 1 pip trade-off, which is fine, but you have 1 resource cards that trade off for 2 pips, like Maleficent in the same color, which is Amethyst. Also, the defense of 2 is a pretty bad break point, so it's pretty often that you'll see the defensive, like the base defensive break point that you want to go for seems to be 3. And then 4 is like, that's a big butt. Like once you get to 4, that's a big butt and usually has to be cleared by a larger resource costed creature, or you're trading into it with two things. So yeah, 2/2. So on the attack end, it doesn't clear those frequent 3 defense cards that your opponent will have. And it also has a 2 defense, which means it's going to be getting cleared by your opponent's 1 drops. So we look at the ability, which is whenever it quests. So that's effectively when you cash in the lore on this, which is at the end of your turn. But when you do that, you exhaust the card, and that opens it up to be cleared or to be attacked by your opponent on the following turn. And a 2/2, it basically is just going to get wrecked immediately. And this early in the game, your opponent is likely going to be able to effectively trade with the card, just taking a few damage counters, not trading 1 for 1. And you really only get 1 activation out of this card, I found so far. But one of the reasons why this card is statted this way is because of the flexibility of being able to be put down as a resource. There's a huge balance in Lorcana when building your deck about how many cards you put in your deck that can't be turned into resources, because those cards are very dangerous to have in hand, because they're effectively dead cards if you can't play them. If they're high cost cards or maybe it's not relevant to the board right now, you literally just sit with dead cards in hand. It's pretty rough.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because when it quests, you basically exert it and then it becomes open. And so I'm really wondering how long a card like this will stay on the board.
Yeah, when I look at a card like Yzma, I see the ability, and this is an ability I want to repeat multiple times for the cost of the card, and I think that is just something that doesn't happen in quote unquote modern day Lorcana, which is the few cards we have. And with the cards that you have in the game right now, you can build a playable deck in every single color and every single combination for what it's worth. But yeah, that ability is likely only being activated once. It's a good ability though. I mean, so far in this game, because we're just slapping all the cards together, usually in a single color, there are cards that are definitely a lot better than others, and digging to those cards is important.
So there was tons of reveals because the videos that came out, etc., had a lot of new cards in them, and Lorcana's been, just kind of sprinkling new content on us. So we'll do our best to go through as many as we can here. But the other thing about this is I want to give props to Lorcania.com for the images and making sure that is all up to par. The next card though is just in time. I took I sort of primered 3 or 4 of them, just the cards of interest that would be interesting, and this is the one that I've looked at, which is just in time. You may play a character with cost 5 or less for free. So it's essentially you can kind of ramp up a 5 cost for 3 on this.
Yeah, and there's actually a specific so you want to be ramping, which is Moana, which is actually one of the most broken cards in the game. And I can deconstruct that one for you and why, because it doesn't look like it at the start. But yeah, this card, because it can be turned to a resource, in my opinion, is unplayable so far, unless you really think that if you sort of ramp out Moana on turn 3, that you're automatically going to win the game. Outside of that, I would rather just play for board and then play Moana on turn 5, most likely. Playing things faster than their intended curve in this game is really, really good, because shift is crazy, by the way. Shift is an incredible mechanic, but I wouldn't put an additional card like this, which is going to frequently be a completely dead draw that also cannot be turned into a resource. Just in Time is like one of the only cards in the game that I actually like wasn't putting into my decks. In the perfect scenario where you draw this on turn 3 and you have a Moana in hand, yeah, it's good. But the fact that it doesn't have the modality to be a resource, it's just, it doesn't do enough. Like, you'll see the cards that don't turn into resources, they're good, and this is not that.
Well, that's the other sort of hindrance of this is they don't have the ability to become resources. So this card needs to be paired up with another card, and it does nothing.
And this card
else.
is dead, right? This card dies. Like, so if we'll look at other cards that can't be turned to resources, but they're creatures. They can be played, they have an effect, etc. This card is dead. Like, if you don't have a 5-cost card, which, you know, if we have every card available to us and we're building a deck around this, shouldn't happen. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the only cards that's just like it literally just rots in your hand and provides no value unless you run into that scenario.
Like, you got to play this on like at 3 for a
or
better
4.
yeah for a better costed unit. Otherwise, it's complete garbage. Yeah, so I'm with you on that one. Next up is we have another iteration of Mickey Mouse. I think that there's like been 5 that have been released.
There's one in every color, yeah.
Yeah, so this one is Mickey Mouse Detective. He's coming in Sapphire, I believe it is. And get a clue. When you play this character, you may put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exert it. So the question is the exertion part, I guess that just means that you can't activate it for resources on the particular turn it is. But it's a 3-cost, a 1/3, 1 lore. What was your experience with this?
I mean, this card is good because there is definitely an archetype that I think is actually the second best deck in the game, which is Sapphire Ruby Ramp. And yeah, this card is good because, I mean, you can play this card in turn 5. It's still a hit, still relevant. It's got that 3 defense butt that we talk about. It cashes in for 1 pip. And there's a reason why it doesn't turn into a resource, because it is that powerful. It effectively generates a resource when you play it. But yeah, I think that this card is sort of it'll go in probably most Sapphire decks. I think that there are some other Sapphire cards, interestingly, that do the same thing but are actions. Let me go find the name of the card because this is particularly interesting. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through, but basically there's an action card that ramps you. Here it is. Yeah, it also doesn't turn into a resource. It's called One Jump Ahead. It costs 2 resources. It's a song, sorry. So you either exert a 2-cost character, or you exert a character, or a 2-cost can do it for free. And it says put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down exerted. This card, in my opinion, they look very similar, but this card sucks because if you draw this on the wrong turn, you basically, like, I found multiple times where I was playing Ruby Sapphire Ramp, and I wanted to ramp into like a Maleficent or something, and I would effectively time walk myself because that thing came in exerted. So it wasn't like netting me an additional resource. You need to actually get this thing out quickly. And then if you draw this later in the game when you're not ramping, this card is super dead, where on the contrary, Mickey Mouse is still a live draw. And like, you can reasonably play Mickey Mouse, just get a body on board and threaten another lore. So yeah, Mickey Mouse, very good card.
So the question now is, like, given the fact that you played all the colors, right? Like, you played a ton. I haven't had a chance to actually get down and dirty. I've watched some games. I've, become familiar with the rule set and everything. We can probably throw in some extra cards as we're sort of discussing things of note, but just discussing the rules in general. And the big reveal, I know that this is something that I have been beating the drum about, is like, release the damn rules already, and we got them. So that's the good news, is that we have the rules. And my initial impression of the rules were there needs to be some more fascinating cards, I think, that come up, but like the tug of war I had in my mind was like, what is gonna separate this from other things, IP aside? What is gonna make this game special? And then I looked at something like Hearthstone, for example, and Hearthstone's tagline, or its appeal, its mantra even, was, deceptively simple, but difficult to master, right? Because the rules for Hearthstone are incredibly, bare bones simple. And to be fair, I mean, they basically explain to you the entire game in a 7-video series, where I think the total runtime of all 7 videos is like 4 minutes or something like that. Like, it's ridiculously short. So you can learn the game, but I think what it needs is it needs more intriguing cards like, let's say, more cards like Aladdin, you know, the Shift Aladdin, the one that steals lore points from your opponent and things like that.
Yeah.
It needs more unique interactions.
Lore interaction. Yeah. That's a don't let me forget about that, because we need to touch on that.
Right.
Lore interaction.
Well, we can talk about it right now. Like I had a few notes that I wrote down about things that I really hope to see in this game, and things I wanted the game to either explore or avoid. And for me, lore interaction is one of the key elements that I think that should not be necessarily overdone, but I think that perhaps it's something that maybe one of these ink identities should really dig into pretty heavily.
Yeah. So I want to address something. Hearthstone is like, I think that some people look at Lorcana and look at the systems that they've sort of built the game off of, and they think it might play similar to Hearthstone. It doesn't at all. In Hearthstone, combat is very primary to the game. I would say combat in Lorcana is secondary or even tertiary. Like, it's very not relevant, which is why the damage counters are not annoying. When I say it's not relevant, it's not that it doesn't happen. It's just there's more of a push and pull between questing and doing that. I have to really think about what I say, because I'm using the terms from other card games often when I'm talking about these things.
Sure.
So it is reaping from Keyforge, but here it's questing. But yeah, most of the push and pull is going off between questing, and then after that you're really just value trading. And there's specific breakpoints when you're building lore, obviously, because you're trying to get to 20. But yeah, it doesn't play anything like Hearthstone, first off. And I think for a good card game to exist, like, the key mantra is simple to learn, hard to master. Actually, that's probably extends far past card games. And Hearthstone is that for sure. I think Hearthstone also pitched something to the card game community at the time, which is, we fixed the land system, which I'm sure there were card games that did it before, but that Lorcana does that as well. If you're coming from Magic, it does fix the quote unquote fix the land system. But my pushback would be is that system has been fixed for 20 years. Like, nobody thinks that you have to build a card game based off lands and this feel bad variance where you don't get to play your cards. It's not a thing. So it's not an actual innovation, but it is a part of Lorcana, is you do have a somewhat smoothing of resources. There is tension between playing cards and putting them down, right? When you put a card down to become a resource, it is card disadvantage. So if my deck only has drops up to 5 in it, am I gonna cash in the six resource? Probably not, unless I plan on getting to 10, and I'm gonna start double spelling and doing things like that. So it is more interesting than just gaining a resource every turn. But yeah, let's talk about lore interaction. Let's talk about Aladdin specifically, because I saw Aladdin, I was like, thank God. But the problem with Aladdin is you have to shift him. I think you have to get him out on turn 5, because you get him out. Obviously, depends what deck you're playing on, but the thing about Aladdin is, it says during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you gain 2 lore and the opponent loses 2 lore. So you play Aladdin on turn 7. Your opponent is likely on some higher amount of lore, because turn 7 is quite late in the game. And then what they're going to do is they're not going to exhaust their creatures, exhaust and quest for lore. They're just going to build the creatures unexhausted and then exhaust them all at once, because if you're allowing Aladdin to get a value trade via your own player agency, it's just a mistake. Now, there is combos, right? You can play Elsa into Aladdin and tap their character or exert their character with Elsa, then kill it with Aladdin. But by turn 7, I just did not find this thing to be super relevant. The main thing that's relevant about Aladdin is it's a 5/5 2-pip body. So what Aladdin does is it cashes in for 2 lore counters, and then it's really hard for your opponent to kill. A 5/5 is really tough to kill. But it also gets Bane fired, Dragon fired. I always said Bane fire. So it does get spot removal. But yeah, the best thing about Aladdin, in my opinion, which is the marquee lore interaction card for us right now, is that it's a 5/5 body that generates 2 lore. You can quest with this, and it's really hard for your opponent to answer. They can't just immediately take it off the board, which is what happens with most creatures. When you quest, it immediately gets taken off the board.
Yeah, and this is why I think that a lot of people might have a misconception of what this game might look like, where on first glance, once you read the rules, you're thinking it's okay. You're just going to put a whole bunch of stuff on the board. You're going to exert them, gain lore. Whoever has more at the more creatures is there's an incentive for the player who's behind to trade and the player who's ahead to quest to a degree. Yeah. But I think that this is a particular card where once it gets jammed on the board, it's like one of those major turning points in a game where everything changes. Once Aladdin hits the board, the player who might be exerting their creatures in order to gain lore are going to stop, because it's now a net loss. But at the same time, like you mentioned, a 5/5 butt, like a 5/5 body, is difficult to remove. So maybe Aladdin quests for 2, and then it 2-for-1 trades into some of their boards.
Exactly.
So I think that in terms of what this card wants to do, I think the game text on it is just more of a threat than it is something in practice.
It's only on your turn, by the way, which it takes the lore as well, which is so if it is 2-for-1 hacking it, it's not getting that value. One thing I want to say, because it's important you brought this up, is that people look at Lorcana and they'll look at the rules and they'll be like, okay, why don't I just build up characters on the board, not do anything, never attack, never quest, and then just boom, exert everything, get 20 at one time, or exert everything, get 10, then have a couple things removed, do 5. Because, like, let's say you're behind. My opponent has a better board than me, and they don't want to do anything, right? They're ahead on board, so therefore they can build to 20 lore. Let's say we're gonna exert, right? We're gonna exert everything, get 20. Whoever's ahead is just gonna win that race. But if you're behind, what do? You just exert, and now your opponent has to trade into you, right? Because like you've exerted, you've quested for lore. Now your opponent has to trade into you, and this is the key turning point. Is what happens in Lorcana is when your opponent wants to trade for one of your creatures, banish them, they have to also exert their character. So then now on the following turn after that, you can now remove their character that went after yours. I do think though, going first was a bit annoying. Going first did seem like a very big advantage. Obviously it's deck dependent, but for most of the decks that we played, going first was pretty frustrating in terms of the advantage, because you're progressing to the specific lore amount, and it's hard for your opponent to force you sometimes to actually interact.
That's always been the biggest balance aspect of a game, is first versus second, and every game kind of has their own way. Usually you get like, there's the coin system, let's say of Hearthstone or other games, where you get that extra resource, you get an extra card, you don't draw on the first turn, for example, which I think is what Lorcana
this
is
game
doing.
Is that,
yeah. My question is this like the mulligan system, and how
freaking ridiculous the mulligan system? So Lorcana would be a ridiculously high variance game, but the mulligan system is extremely generous, and the reason it is because in a traditional mulligan system, let's do London Mulligan, right, which is the current mulligan system that Magic uses. You draw 7 cards, you don't want them, right? You shuffle them back into your deck, then you draw 7 cards again, then you put 1 on the bottom. That's better than what Magic used to be. Magic used to be I don't know the old system's name, but it used to be draw 7 cards, don't want them, shuffle them back, draw 6 cards.
It was like, I think it was called like the Vancouver system or something like that.
Yeah. So Lorcana is that on steroids. And the reason is because you draw 7, then you put as many as you want back on the bottom of your deck, and after that, you shuffle. So like, let's say I draw 7 cards, I put 5 on the bottom. I've now, I know the bottom 5 cards in my deck, which I'm not going to draw via my mulligan. And now I draw 5 more cards. So you're able to dig towards like very specific cards and very specific, like, having a turn 1 play in Lorcana, really important, it seems like, because there's a lot of turn 1 cards that reap for 2 or quests for 2 lore, and that's really dangerous if you can't answer that.
Let me ask you this. So just so I can clarify here, because so the mulligan system as it exists right now is you draw 7. You don't like 6 of those cards. You put 6 at the bottom. You draw 6, and then you shuffle.
Yes, after.
And you
unless we played wrong, which is, I think, unlikely. I'm pretty sure it's been played corrected, but yeah,
okay.
The mulligan system is
it just
busted.
seems, but there's no penalty in terms of how many cards you can draw, right?
Well, it stops after the no. So like, if I had 7, I could put 7 on the bottom, draw 7.
Right, but there's no second mulligan, right? Like, for example, in the London system, you put 1 down. But if you don't like those 7 cards, you do it again and you put 2 under, and you keep getting penalized in that regard. Okay, but I think part of this is also the fact that, like all card games, they're trying to learn from the mistakes of their whatever the predecessor is, and for the most part, it's Magic. And the various, like in Magic's gone through a series of different mulligan systems to find whatever will frankly hit that outcome that they're looking for, which is non-games. They want to avoid
Yeah.
non-games. And I think that what you mentioned here is like going first is so important, and it feels like such an advantage that if you go first, if your opponent goes first and establishes a board and you don't have a response and you have to wait a turn or two, that's the non-game, right? It doesn't matter how many resources you can generate from the cards in your hand. It's the fact that you need to dig for those early drops.
So it depends. Like, obviously, if you drop and you get something on turn 3 and then clear it, like that, it's usually not the end of the game, but we found the games to be tight enough that it mattered. One thing I want to mention, and regarding mulligans and why I think they use the system, is mulliganing in Magic feels bad. It does. It's a disadvantage. You would rather never mulligan. In Lorcana, mulliganing feels good. It feels good. You will probably not mulligan, I think, in less than 5% of your games. You will mulligan, I think, almost every single game because it's just an advantage. You have to draw the most ridiculous 7 cards. It's net positive, where in other games it's negative.
Well, think of it this way: like you're playing 5-card stud in poker, right? Like everybody's goal is to draw a straight flush. Like that is what the ideal thing is. You draw your cards, and like if you have the option to throw 3 of them away to improve your hand, you're going to do it. There's always going to be something that's not meant to be there. You have too many 1-drops, so you make sure that you have an ideal curve to that degree. And I like that. I honestly think that that's okay. And people might think of this as, well, it's kind of a little bit like training wheels to a degree, that it's a way to synthetically create more games. But what's wrong with that? Like, there's nothing wrong with that.
So my issue with the mulliganing system is simply the power level, to be honest. I think that it just really rewards putting, like, I don't know, if you have a specific card that you play towards, like let's say you play towards your Dragonfire because you want your turn 5 spot removal, like you will mulligan very heavily to get that. And you will also do the same for your 1-drop. So like Pascal is pretty busted. And it's the reason, let's talk about Pascal, because Pascal is probably the best card in the game. Well, one of them, at least. It's definitely the best card in Amethyst. So Pascal, Rapunzel's companion. It's a 1/1 Storyborn ally, 1 cost, can be turned into a resource, and it has 1 pip. 1/1 with 1 pip. Doesn't sound crazy, but it has something else. It's camouflage. While you have another character in play, this character gains evasive. This is evasive in Ruby. We'll talk about Tigger and them. It sucks. It's not as good. It can be okay, but it's not great. Evasive on Pascal is freaking busted because you have a 1-drop that comes down on turn 1, gets you a lore, then you draw something on turn 2, and it's very likely, at least with the current set of cards, that you just keep getting lore out of Pascal because it has evasive. Your opponent can't interact with it, or they can't interact with like till turn 3 or turn 4. And let's say you have multiple Pascals on the board, right? I have 2 Pascals on the board. I'm doing this, I'm consistently questing for lore. It has evasive. My opponent can't do anything. My opponent goes, boom, turn 4, evasive character. I'm going to attack Pascal and kill it. Like, it's tough. So only characters with evasive can challenge. Like, it's a really strong turn 1. It's tempo. I think it's currently like one of the most powerful cards in the game. Dropping like a understated, overcosted card, which is what the Ruby evasive cards are so far, in my opinion, because they have 1 lore. It's just not the best way to deal with Pascal, and Pascal is like such a free roll of a 1-drop, which is. Let's talk about let's contrast this though. So let's look at Maleficent biding her time. This is an Amethyst card as well, also 1-drop. And it looks way more powerful at first. So it's a 1/1, costs 1 resource, can be turned into a resource, has 2 pips. So a 1 resource 1/1 with 2 pips sounds busted. Well, your opponent's going to aggressively mulligan for their 1-drop as well, because things like Maleficent are so dangerous, and you're probably max getting 2 lore out of Maleficent unless your opponent gets unlucky. I think if you get like 4 lore out of it, they kind of just lose the game. I mean, that's like 25% of your win condition. But Pascal, mid-game, early game, crazy. Mid-game, good. End game, good. Like, you can be progressing your win condition consistently with a 1-drop like Pascal when you're dropping it on turn 6. It's crazy.
So from what you've seen right now, is big body better? Is sort of elusiveness better? Like evasion better? What kind of, like, from what you've played so far in terms of the rule sets and whatever, what has been the cards that you've looked at and said, okay, this is overperforming. This is an all-star.
So actually, the best cards, in my opinion, exist in what looks to be the least powerful color at first glance, which is amber. Um, and that is both Moana and Stitch. So shifting Stitch in on turn 4, he's a 6 cost. So I'll just read it out. Stitch, Rockstar, 3/5, 6 cost, can be turned into a resource. Has shift 4, so you can play it on top of another Stitch. The other Stitch, by the way, costs 1 resource. So you play it on turn 1. And it says, I mean, the Stitch ability is also busted. It says, adoring fans, whenever you play a character with cost 2 or less, you may exert them and draw a card, which is a total free roll because there's summoning sickness in this game. But Stitch quest for 3 and has a 5, but it's really tough to deal with unless you Dragonfire it. And let me hit you with the double trouble of Amber, which is Moana of Montanui, Storyborn Hero Princess. It's a 1/6/5 cost.
This card is nuts, dude.
This card is the best card in the game. It's super annoying. Like, let me put this in, for example, Scar clears this over 2 turns. The fact that things like individual cards clear this over 2 separate turns, even if they can, because Scar is a 5/3, which is a red aggressive card. That means Moana is a 5 cost that comes down and is gonna, like, if you're maintaining board parity, which is pretty common in Lorcana, you're gonna get 6 lore out of it. It's crazy, dude. And also when this quest, you may ready another princess character that cannot quest for this turn. Really relevant because basically you have a princess on the board like Aurora or something like that if you're playing blue, and then you quest with that. You do Moana's ability. You untap that, right? You unexert it, and now it can't be attacked. It can't be cleared except for spot removal.
What I'm thinking about here is, well, hold on a second. Elsa's not a princess. That's weird to me. Because she's a snow queen. I was thinking like of the combo of having her with, for example, Elsa, where you're just consistently exerting your opponent's characters. Like you exert with Elsa, you ready up, you exert again, and you could essentially freeze out 2 of their characters, or just put 2 of their characters into the crosshairs. But the thing about Moana is, like you said, you know, the readiness and such that will protect your other princesses is really awesome. But it's the fact that this character has 6 willpower and 3 lore, like you mentioned. Like what can deal with her in that framework? Like you need, like you said, you need Scar to be hitting the board before her. You need 2. It's a 2 character trade in this regard, and that's
to get it off on 1 turn, right? 6 lore progresses almost 30% of your win condition. That's ridiculous. Like it's really tough to deal with. And if your opponent goes Moana, like Moana turn 5, Moana turn 6, it's like, what do you do? And if they do use that card, which I know we said was bad, like just in time. Dude, if you just in time Moana, like that's the only, I think right now it's the only reason you play just in time, which is you play a character with cost 5 or less for free. If you just in time Moana on turn 3, I don't know how you lose that game.
It seems it does seem unlosable, but again, you have 4 copies of Just in Time, 4 copies of Moana in a 60-card deck that you don't really dig through very much. But again, like you mentioned, with the super aggressive mulligans, you basically say, I got 1 of the pieces, mulligan 6, let's go for another one. Like it's you got your peanut butter, you just got to find your jelly, and that you're good to go.
3 lore is just really a lot. And you know, in the Scar example, we talked about Scar over 2 turns. It's not what happens. What happens is Scar attacks us, makes it, you either trade 2 for 1 into it, but your Scar now has a damage counter, and then when we go back to my turn, I just kill your Scar because it's 5/3. It has 2 health now. I just kill your Scar, and now you're still trying to deal with Moana. Like Moana's a really good. Stitch is really good. In our testing, Amber Amethyst was by far it was the best deck, and I would say almost somewhat closely behind was Sapphire Ruby Ramp. Sapphire Ruby Ramp, we can talk about that because I think it's interesting because it obviously it plays Dragonfire, which I think holds up the Ruby color completely. Just if we talk about card power in the current set of cards, Dragonfire is just nuts. You have a lot of troubling things that hit the board on your opponent's side, and you need spot removal because of things like Moana, and because of things like Maleficent, which is what you're going to be playing in Ruby as well, which is a 9 resource. Maleficent is Monstrous Dragon, 7 power, 5 defense, 9 resources, but can be turned into a land, and then it has Dragonfire written on the card, so it's an inherent sort of 2 for 1 here, and then it also gets 2 pips. The key about both Moana and Stitch is that they can be ramped out quicker than, you know, the cost printed in the top left, and they quest for 3 lore, which is really, really a lot. Like Mickey Mouse, Brave Little Tailor, and Ruby. I know it has 4 lore, but it costs 8. And the difference between something costing 5 or costing 5 in Moana's case, or costing 4 if you shift Stitch in his case, in Amber, is massively different. Like Mickey Mouse feels a bit win more, where the other cards are the crux of what Amber's doing right now.
So moving through the gameplay that you've played a lot and whatnot, and the cards that we've seen, there are certain things that are kind of ringing a little bit of an alarm bell to a degree of, again, I don't know how many cards we have left to see, but we haven't gone through half of what obviously is going to be playable. So let's say we have 25% of the card pool. What I really need to see is more AoE. I think that is one of the concerns that a lot of players, if they don't see it at the end of the reveal season, is if there's no way to punish greedy boards, or punish or find a catch-up mechanic to a degree. Like every game has one where it's like, I'm not developing the board, or on the other side, it's like, I want to punish the overextension of certain players. If there's no incentive to hold back and play it safe in certain regards by sort of avoiding punishes, like if there's no board clear, if there's no like 8-drop board clear, or a 9-drop that's like deal 3 or 4 damage to everything on the board, or whatnot, like if there's none of that, then that can be concerning, because then it seems like if you just find the curve and develop the biggest board, there's no way you can lose as long as you play clean.
So so far, from what I can tell, it is one of those games where I think most card games are like that. Like Hearthstone is definitely like that. Magic's definitely like, if you curve out the way your deck wants to curve out, you'll probably win the game. In Flesh and Blood, this is the contrary. In Flesh and Blood, if you draw like your best cards, like you still have to really think about, you know, the threat your opponent is presenting you, how you're going to play your game plan. Where in those other games you don't. I think that Lorcana is one of those games where, you know, if you do curve out how your deck is designed to, you probably will win, especially if you're going first, because there's just not too much interaction right now. But like you said, we haven't seen too many cards. We haven't seen that many cards, so there could be a lot of interaction coming. Right now, it's slightly less interaction. Yeah, for me, it's not really board clears. I would just like to see more rush, more ability to affect the board when the card is played. Right. I would say that's the thing I want to see the most.
Well, there's still lots left to be I guess uncovered as we move forward, and that's why it's important, I think, for not just you and I, but for everybody who's out there in this community, to sort of withhold some of their judgment. Like in the same way that I didn't say jack squat about The Last Jedi as a movie until Rise of Skywalker came out, I'm reserving a final judgment, and I'm sure that once everything is revealed, you and I can kind of go through the entire set and sort of give it a better evaluation, pick our favorite cards and things like that. But ultimately, I think that it's important to just say that, dude, there's like still 75% of this set that comes out, and who knows what kind of goodies that are going to be left to be thrown out there. Like they said, there are 3 types of cards. There's characters, there's song, actions, and then there's items, right? Like those are the 3 types of cards. So we know that there's nothing lurking around the corners that's going to catch us off guard. But what might catch us off guard are those AoE cards that I think are necessary. I think that there has to be necessary, whether they're overcosted. There has to be a mechanic, or there has to be an ability for players to come in and say, you have been so far ahead of me. Now it's time for me to sort of equalize the game.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Emerald, because I thought Emerald looked really cool. And
Sure.
I think a lot of people will gravitate towards the Emerald Ruby combo deck, which there is a bit of a loop. The Dragonfire loop with Lady Tremaine is a thing. It is really powerful. when it happens. So Lady Tremaine is like a particularly dangerous card because it doesn't turn into a resource. The effect's really powerful. But if you're playing right now, if you're playing Emerald Ruby, your only target for Lady Tremaine is Dragonfire, which is a good target. But dropping Lady Tremaine by itself on turn 6 is a 1/5 that does nothing, unplayable. So it's a good deck when it draws the cards it needs to. A lot of people, I've seen some talk about a card that when I first played it, I was like, Jesus Christ, this card's powerful. And that's Cheshire Cat, Not All There, in Emerald. It's a 0/3 Storyborn. It costs 3 and can be turned into a resource, and it says, lose something. When this character is banished, is challenged and banished, which means your opponent is attacking it, banish a challenging character, and it reaps for 2 pips. So a 3 cost that has a 3 but that comes down and reaps for 2 pips, you have to answer that. So you see where people think this is powerful. It's because you have to hit it with something that can kill a 3 but because you want to kill it in a single turn, and it's going to banish that. So the reason why this card is not as powerful as people think is somewhat matchup dependent. Like, let's say you're playing against a deck that only plays big things, right? Like huge characters that cost a lot of resources. Then yeah, Cheshire Cat's going to be amazing because they have to trade their 6 drop in the Cheshire Cat and it gets banished. But what happens most of the time is you're playing against somebody, they've reaped with their 1-drops, and now their 1-drops are just sitting there unexerted, because that's what happens in a lot of games of Lorcana. You play your Cheshire Cat, you reap with it, they trade their 1-drops into it. Let's say they have 2 1-drops, they trade, attack it for 1, then attack it for 2. The second 1-drop gets banished. So the ability is not as crazy as everybody thinks. So I think that the use case they see for this card is that somebody has to trade their Goofy or their Tigger into it. And it feels great then. But I think that, if you play people that mulligan correctly towards 1-drops, they will just remove it that way. And I think Cheshire Cat actually trades down in that scenario. But still one of the best cards in Emerald, to be honest. Like, automatic slot in. But I do believe that a lot of the people that play this game the first card that they think is broken is probably going to be Cheshire Cat.
Yeah, people are always going to complain about stuff that.
Well, it's not complaining. I don't think it's as powerful as people think, and I just want to play.
But people will. I mean, we've played cards long enough where as soon as something new comes out that people don't know how to shut down or answer adequately right out of the gate, it's immediately, pitchforks and torches the whole way through. I want to. Again, I'm not trying to. This isn't, me trying to just crap on the game. That's not what I'm doing. What I want to do is I want to bring up concerns of elements that I think can possibly be added to the game down the line, or things I'd like to see. And one of those for me is not having any type of interaction during your opponent's turn. Where
that won't change, unfortunately.
It did change.
It will not change.
Oh yeah,
it's inherent to the thesis of the game.
Right, and that was the part. Like, when first of all, I want to give super props to Disney Lorcana and Ravensburger for doing those videos, those learn to play videos. I think were very well done, and I think they were super concise. They were precise, concise, and just very, very well separated and presented. Those were great. But while I was sitting through those and watching those and sort of taking it in, one of the things was, I'm like, oh damn, it was basically like, okay, and then you're done. And it's like, it really, really, it hasn't happened much. I guess in Hearthstone, that's part of it, like where you just do your turn and you're done.
Yeah.
A lot of games, digital games, kind of have that feel to a degree. But I'm used to now having some sort of agency, some sort of influence on my opponent's decision tree when they want to do X, Y, Z, and I shove like a B in there somewhere to sort of throw them off kilter. That's the one thing I think that, like you said, it's not going to happen, but I would love for them to maybe explore, if they haven't already, which I'm sure they have, but I would love for them to just discuss why they want to stray away from a card.
I can tell you if you want. Like asynchronous turns this is fully asynchronous turns. Like, they're like in Flesh and Blood, the turns are async, but there's a illusion of synchronous turns because when your opponent attacks you, you can block. So you're using cards from hand to block. Hearthstone, on the other hand, is completely asynchronous. You play your turn, they play your turn. This game is like Hearthstone, and there's a huge trade-off. Asynchronous turn structure in a card game is incredibly archaic and very boring, and it does not mesh with the modern trend of, I don't know, human beings at all, which is shorter attention spans and more time actually interacting. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. But the reason they did it is because it's really simple. like when you start getting into synchronous turns, or even, you know, like semi-synchronous turns, which is something like Magic, where there's 30 windows, the game gets a lot more complicated. Not a little, it's like exponentially, like a ton more complicated. But you look at even Lorcana, there's no agency even in combat. Combat is asynchronous, right? Like when your opponent is attacking your characters, you are not doing anything. You're just sitting there. You've made decisions prior turn to expose them to said combat, which is why combat's not really a thing in this game. They did it for a reason, and the reason is because it's simple. But yeah, I think that it's a weird choice in 2023 where you've had, you know, games like Marvel Snap come out, which is obviously utilized as a digital medium to create this synchronous game loop. But yeah, I mean, this is about as asynchronous as it gets. The idea would be is that, you know, at high level competitive play, you're thinking about your turn while your opponent plays out their turn, and that's what happens in Hearthstone. It is an incredibly deep game, and at the highest level, it is challenging to actually execute your game plan in the amount of time you have because of the roping system. Lorcana's not like that. It is very much my turn, and while I do that, you sit there and twiddle your thumbs. Now your turn. I do the same, which in my opinion is overall I think it's poor design. But it's been chosen in order to make things simple.
Like poor design, I guess, to a degree of maybe based off what we're used to, because we play card games that have a million different variables to float at any given turn, you know, to a degree. But at the same time, playing games like Hearthstone, playing games like, you know, I've played Gwent, I've played cards like World War II card game. I've played a whole bunch of different games that have no agent, that have no, you know, there's no interaction on your own turn. Mythgard, for example, and whatnot, and they're successful models. Like they do work. It does nothing. Not everything has to have a stack, as it were. Yeah. But I think that the appeal of this is, like you mentioned, or as we've mentioned in the past, is that the target audience of this is that it's not. They're not targeting us. They're not targeting Brendan Patrick and Matt DiMarco to play this game. They're targeting, you know, people of our age group, sure, but they also want to target younger players who don't want to have to worry about getting gooned by someone like us at a tournament, because the rules are more simplistic. And yeah, people like us with all the experience might have a better success because we understand the inherent tenets of card games in general, and we can succeed in that regard. But we don't have that extra luggage of, I know when to interact on the stack, I know when to play this, I know when to, you know, do my end of turn effects and whatever. This is a very, you know, it's a hamburger that is, you know, bread, meat, and like 2 condiments. It's not like those hipster burgers that are 10 feet tall.
So it's not inherently simple. I think that they've made the choice for the sake of simplicity, but one of the most popular asynchronous games ever created is incredibly complex, and that's chess. It's completely asynchronous. It's completely asynchronous, but it's really complicated. And I think, unfortunately, I think it's something that adds to the complication of competitive chess is the chess clock. Without the chess clock, I mean, yes, it's still complicated, but in a situation like Lorcana, if you're playing it like competitively, it's going to be freaking boring when your opponent is taking forever on their turn and you just sit there and do nothing. And I don't think there's any way around that. It's going to suck. Like, not the game's going to suck, but that aspect of the game is not going to be fun. Maybe at the highest level of competitive play, like, you will just be utilizing that time to think about your turn. But because there is no clock, and, you know, I mean, that's just how card games go. Like, it's just going to be really boring as your opponent sits there and just takes up time to play. Like, they're just playing their game. You're spectating. That's it.
They've had this conversation about game clocks and stuff, like, because of Oldham Mirrors and Flesh and Blood and how long it takes and stuff like that. And it's like, I've played games where I'm like, dude, I took up like 7% of the clock, and, you know,
it'd be easier in this game because in Flesh and Blood you're passing priority. In this
absolutely
game,
yeah. That's the point I want to get to, is that asynchronous gameplay is a better environment for game clocks. But I think that game clocks, to a degree, also become other ways to sort of shark your opponent and be greasy in that regard. I understand the necessity of it, but you've played a bunch. What's the average time of a game?
Depends on your opponent, obviously, at this point. But no, it was like 20 minutes, maybe 20, 30 minutes, 50 minutes, to be honest.
Sure.
And, you know, because the game is completely asynchronous, if this aspect of your opponent taking an egregiously more amount of time than you, and it's just like really uninteractive and not fun, and things time out, which I know that there's like judges and there's like this really sort of wishy-washy concept of what is and what is not slow play. Like in a game like this, you could actually institute some sort of clock system at the highest level, and I think that everybody would, I mean, the people competing, not casual people, would have a better experience for it potentially, but we'll have to see. It mainly stems off, like, is it a problem with people timing people out and taking, you know, 80% of the time, but the patient takes 20. But yeah, my core point here as we waffle along is sitting there doing nothing while your opponent plays their turn is boring.
What we got to do is we're gonna have an episode about etiquette. I think that's necessary. I feel like every podcast card game is going to do like their etiquette episode, and yeah. I honestly believe that. I think Lorcana is going to be a game that is going to introduce a lot of people to card games. I think that, especially paper ones, because a lot of people are going to play the digital stuff for sure, whether it's, you know, casual style, you know, mobile games that you're not playing against anybody, you're just collecting cards and spending your in-game currency, to the more established stuff like Hearthstone or Runeterra or whatever, where you're actually playing against other players. There's no etiquette that you have or that you've established because you haven't sat across from somebody and smelled them and looked at them and like heard them rifling through their cards, and it drives you freaking insane. But you can't say stuff because there's etiquette involved, Brendan Patrick. And I swear, I think that this should be a good episode. As soon as they announce like the first, you know, local play tournaments and such like that, and into the bigger organized play announcements, it's a duty of ours to sort of explain to people how not to be jerks.
I would actually go the opposite. I would say we should differentiate ourselves. Do a episode on how to angle shoot.
Oh god. Yeah, let me call
how to angle shoot
with special guest Matthew Folks. Absolutely.
Oh god. So like yeah, in-person card games are inherently like so much more respectful. There's so much, like, I don't know, just people being human beings rather than digital card games. Like, you play a couple games of Marvel Snap, you're going to get emoted every single time you lose. It's just like, that just doesn't happen in paper. Yeah, maybe we should go over some of the other colors. So we talked about pretty most colors. I guess the last one here is steel. Steel had like the least tools to work with, but it does have some very powerful cards. Captain Hook is as good as we thought it was. Fire the Cannons is very good because it gets rid of those pesky one drops, and it can remove something like Pascal. There is a new card that was dropped, which is Captain Hook, Captain of the Jolly Roger. Let me read out those cards, the original ones. So Captain Hook, Forceful Duelist, the first one I talked about, is 1/2. It costs 1 resource, and it has the ability Challenger. +2 while challenging this character gets +2, and it has 1 pip. This card was worse than I thought because it only works on aggression, and your opponent, you know, if they're opening themselves up to be by Captain Hook, it's by their own volition. So if they see Captain Hook, they can play around it, you know, is the idea. Then the other card was Fire the Cannons. So this is an action. Fire the Cannons costs 1 resource, cannot be turned into a resource. That's deal 2 damage to chosen character. So, you know, 2 damage to whatever you want. It's really, really powerful in this game so far. And the new card, which actually just makes steel so much better, is Captain of the Jolly Roger. It's a 3/4, cost 4, cannot be turned into a resource. It says double the powder. When you play this character, you may return an action card named Fire the Cannons from your discard to your hand in a quest for 1 pip. So this is a good card. This is a really good card because one of the best cards in steel right now is Fire the Cannons. Probably the reason to play steel, to be honest, is for Fire the Cannons. And Hercules True Hero, which is a 3/3 that costs 3, can be turned into a resource, has effectively taunt this game. Which is called Bodyguard. So, yeah. Steel had the least to work with, but it was still really powerful because of Fire the Cannons.
It feels like, you know, Captain Hook with the... I think that, like, when you were playing, were you finding that you were just running out of cards really fast between the establishing new ink and developing a board? Like, you're dropping 2 and drawing 1, so you're going to run out real fast. Did you...
Not as bad as I thought. So there's a game that I played called where, yeah, I mean, it was kind of like that, where you were making a decision between drawing from a resource deck or drawing from your main deck, and your resource deck would become a resource, obviously. So eventually, like even in the mid game, both players would be top decking, and it sucked. In this game, it's definitely a thing, but it's not as bad as I would think, because you kind of just, you have your target amount of resources that you want to get, and then, it's not like you're forced to play it every turn. So eventually, you're just kind of just drawing cards, unless you're trying to make enough resources to start double spelling or something like that. So I would say, yes, it happens, and it's a negative where both players have one card in hand or just top decking to try to win the game. I really hate that aspect, but it's also, a lot of it comes from most likely that we're playing with extremely underpowered decks. But it happens, but it's really not as frequent or as bad as you would expect when you look at this from like the top level of its base design.
Sounds good. All right. Anything else you want to hit on before we hit the mailbag?
Let me just look through the cards.
While you're looking, I just want to mention like if a game seems simplistic, that's because it's the design space that you're looking at. The rule set are very tight. They're very concise in that regard. Doesn't mean that the game is not complex or layered. It just seems like just because you can wrap up a how-to video in like 4 minutes doesn't mean that there's a lot of layers to it. And that's the one thing that I'm very excited to try is once the cards are basically all out there, I want to get down and dirty with all these color combinations and such. Like I really want to see what the competitive aspect of this game is, because that's what appeals to me. That's what appeals to me about most card games is the competition aspect. And what I'm really looking forward to are the kind of the tribalism within the game that'll be like, well, I'm you know how people in Magic are like, oh, I really hate blue players, I really hate blue players, I really hate Esper players, I hate, I want to see how that translates. I want to see how these ideologies finally kind of become solidified, where people, when you show up and that first drop that they have, once you see the card or the color, you're like, I know precisely the kind of goon you are.
Well, let's talk about why Amethyst is even included, because we only talked about Amber. So it's actually because of Pascal, of course, very good card, but it's because of Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorcerer. This is freaking busted right now. It's a 3/4, it costs 4, it can be turned into a resource, but the ability, you may pay 1 less resource to play broom characters. Here we go. Ceaseless Worker. When one of your broom characters is banished in a challenge, you may return that card to your hand, and it quests for 2 pips. Let's look at the broom. The one broom we have, which is Magic Broom Bucket Brigade. It's a 2/2, cost 2, can be turned into a resource. It says Sweep. When you play this character, you may shuffle a card from any discard into its player's deck, and it quests for 1 pip. So the reason why this is busted is you play Mickey Mouse and you never card, and it really can't be dealt with. It needs spot removal. So your 4-cost Mickey Mouse has to be killed by something like a Dragonfire, which costs 5, or the 5-cost removal, which is in blue or sapphire. So both removals are 5 costs that can deal with Mickey Mouse. And I assume that, like Fire the Cannons, you're not getting 2 Fire the Cannons. It's just ridiculous for this. But with the Magic, you put Mickey Mouse down, you play the Magic Brooms for 1 or even 0 if you have 2 Mickey Mouses. And what those Magic Brooms do, they're 2/2s, is anytime your opponent quests, anytime your opponent attacks anything, your Magic Brooms just clear it for free. Because your Magic Brooms trade, they go back to your hand, you play them for free, and then every time they hit the board, you shuffle your opponent's worst card back into their deck. It's so good, dude.
Yeah.
It's so good. That's the best. That Amber Amethyst is the best deck. If anybody listening to this is like, no, my red deck, my Ruby deck is so good. Money match. Let's go.
I was waiting for you to become the degenerate that I know you are. I'm so excited for this. Like, I'm really geared up for all the local tournaments that are going to sort of start popping up. I've spoken to like Realm Games. I've spoken to MinMax Games. I had like dinner with the guy who owns MinMax, and he's like, we got to talk about Lorcana. I was like, yes, we do. Let's talk about Lorcana, dude. Like, absolutely. So the competitive juices are already flowing out there in the like the retailer space, which is cool, but we still have there's still a lot to be desired when it comes to OP announcements, because we don't know what the high end is, right? Like, we don't know what the end of the rainbow is, where that pot of gold lies. And I mean, again,
you can extrapolate from the local game store announcement, which was they're doing local game store rewards based off attendance rather than performance. So I would say that if you were to extrapolate from that, it's bad for what we want OP to be. Ultimately, it's bad. Do I care if people get rewards for competing at their local? No, that's obviously not where my head is at. But I would say that like the approach that they're taking there sort of signals maybe a more casual approach to organized play overall, which could be no major tournaments.
I feel it. Well,
but grassroots tournaments, like you said, min-max from games, these grassroots tournament organizers in Flesh and Blood putting on better tournaments than the publisher right now, in my opinion. So they could definitely make a splash. But it's just like if you're talking about like world championships, big stuff from the publisher, we just have no idea.
Yeah, no, that's a good example. Like Realm Games has paired up with Min-Max, Green Tree Sports Cards, a whole bunch of others, Kayfabe cards, and they're like, all right, well, we'll just do it ourselves. Like, it takes money, it takes organization, but they've done it with other card games fairly successfully. Like even the small scale tournaments, like the Brawl, like the first Realm Brawl for Flesh and Blood, it had like over like almost simultaneously with another like $100,000 tournament that a lot of people opted to go to. This tournament still drew in about 100 competitors and was concurrently streaming to about 14 to 1,500 people. Like there's interest in these grassroots things, and I think that if this is a whole conversation for another day, but ultimately, if OP doesn't occur, I don't think people are going to be worried. There's someone who's going to pick up that mantle.
For sure. And just to heighten how, I know this is a Lorcana podcast, but they will be on Lorcana. And just to heighten how important and just incredible the work they do is, the publisher of the game, which the publisher does a lot of good work for OP, and we've talked about it on this podcast, but the publisher, who makes tens of millions of dollars, doesn't do coverage for battle hard level tournaments, it puts up less money, less rewards. Like these are grassroots organizers that are competing and putting on better tournaments, in my opinion, than a company that makes tens of millions of dollars year over year. So like these guys are serious about making great organized play. So them coming into Lorcana, we don't really need Ravensburger to do it in the end, but it would be great.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like don't get me wrong. Well, we want a world championship, we want nationals, and we want the equivalent of like, a Grand Prix circuit or something like that. All right, so that sort of concludes our discussion about the gameplay, our first initial impressions of the cards and how they interact. But we do have the Spilled Ink mailbag, so let's dig into that one. You want to go first?
Yep. So the first one comes from Tommy Pizza. Tommy Pizza says, with the release of songs, what Disney song would you like to see as a card, and what would it do? Brendan's answer is obvious, and so this is mostly for Flake.
Well, if it was Make a Man Out of You, the card should have you in your...
Oh, you think that's mine? Mine's
is that not
that?
What the hell?
Twist.
Well, okay, so clearly the sequel is not anything close to the original, because now you're throwing a curveball at me. What would yours be then?
The Bare Necessities from Jungle.
Okay, maybe. I mean, you have talked about like your appreciation of Jungle Book.
But that's a great song.
Yeah, that is a good song. I don't know. I'd probably like Hakuna Matata. Is that even a card already? I think Hakuna Matata would be really damn good. Like a no worries thing. And this is how it would be. This is how I envision Hakuna Matata. That would be like lore friendly. Hakuna Matata, no cares, no worries. I think it would cost a decent amount, like 6 or 7. But it says all your exerted characters cannot be challenged. So it's just like, hands off, mofo. And it would cost you a lot. But it gives you a little bit of peace of mind. I think that's what I would do.
Yeah, that would be powerful. Follow up if you want. Sing. Who would be the funniest character to sing that song in game? Since I imagine that's what they do thematically when you tap someone to pay for a song.
So the true story, when it said you may whatever to sing the song for free, I thought you had to sing the actual damn song to get it to play for free. I swear to God, on the first glance, that's why I'm an idiot, first of all. But that was for me the biggest red flag where I'm like, okay, if you can just like sing stuff instead of paying for it, then this, then
Metazoo
this,
does that.
Well, that's what it is. Like Metazoo does stuff if like, if you're within 10 feet of a plant, like this card gets like plus.
Yeah, if you flatulate. -10 attack.
Yeah, so that was my first thing. I think that the funniest character to sing anything, frankly, is Danny DeVito's character in Hercules. Like Because
God, Danny DeVito's in Hercules. I totally forgot.
Yeah, he's the trainer, and he does have a singing part in that, and it's absolutely horrid. But like hearing Danny DeVito sing Hakuna Matata, like you could hear it in your mind. And I'm on a binge of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, so it ain't pretty.
Yeah. This next question is actually this question. How many more cards do you think Ravensburger provide to us until the game launches? And do you think that the really good cards were already revealed? This is a great question. How many cards? That's I don't know. I do think they'll spoil the entire set before we get it. But yeah, it's just speculation. But the interesting thing here, how many really good cards think were revealed? And I think that's a great question, because if the gameplay feels kind of bland right now, then you're like, okay, well, we're going to get the better cards later. I'm not saying the gameplay feels bland, but if that was the case, my case would be, I think that we've gotten a lot of the significant, because the cards that we've been playing with are marquee art on some of the starter decks, which I think is super relevant. Like, those are major cards. Are they the constructed build rounds? I'm not sure, and those are the cards that I'm really interested in. But Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorcerer, which is a freaking busted card, is on the Amber Amethyst box with Moana, which is also a busted card. They're both on the starter box, which, by the way, if you're like, where's my value? How do I spike kids at my local tournament? Buy the Amber Amethyst box for sure.
Oh, don't already tell people all these nasty things. This was from Lorcana, Germany, by the way, this question. My suspicion is that they're going to be trickling out cards ongoing, and there's no reason that they're going to withhold any. I think that that's just the way to go right now, is that you give out basically everything. The one outlier I would say is that Flesh and Blood typically doesn't reveal their fabled card, their like one of chase card in every set. They let people organically go out there, buy the product, and then reveal it in that way. Now, the way things go now is that they allow retailers to do their openings and share that information. So that information gets leaked before release anyways. Some retailer out there opens like 40 cases, finds it, posts it, and that's busted. I don't think there is anything of that ilk in this game. My guess is that they're going to release everything, and I think that what you said, Brendan, is true. They needed good cards out and a decent amount of unique and powerful cards out when the rules were leaked, so that people don't look at the rules, look at the basic Bobo cards, and say this game sucks. So
I still think it could be the basic cards, but I think with your first set, like your first alpha set, you're more likely to put out some of the more I don't know, the good cards, right? Like at least cards that you're proud of their design. Well, I think, if it's like your second, third set, maybe you trickle it out and we have something exciting. But I do think that, they're trying to get as much eyes as possible right now. So yeah, I don't think that, Mickey Mouse and Moana being on the starter deck and being as powerful as they are, because I think they are fundamentally powerful. What Lorcana is, I don't think that those are like, these are like the sleeper common cards that are going to be in like a pauper deck. No, I think that these are actually good cards.
Last question. This one coming in from Hobbies and Happiness, a wonderful podcast and great people there. After doing some playtesting, Brennan, has your opinion on damage counters changed at all?
Yeah, it changed. So if combat was like Hearthstone and the board state wasn't limited, which it is in Hearthstone, you can only have so many things on the board, then I think they would be really annoying. But because, in my testing, combat was just not, it wasn't a huge feature in the game. It was kind of just like a secondary thing. Like, yes, if you're inefficiently trading, you're going to lose a lot. And I think that that's going to be one of the biggest skill gaps immediately, is correctly trading with your characters and knowing when to quest and when to not. But it was more like something like a quest, and it would just kind of get removed, or it would get, target removal or something like that. It wasn't back and forth combat like Hearthstone. It was not that at all. So yeah, you weren't maintaining a lot of damage counters, to be honest. And you wouldn't fire the cannons, which is deal damage, at like a Moana. So your Moana isn't just sitting there as a 1/4. Like, nobody would do that. Nobody would shoot a fire the cannons at a Moana that wasn't exhausted. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a 1/4 now, and you can't attack it. That's the thing about, like, in Lorcana, when they're not exhausted, you can't attack them. So those things just don't happen, and because of that, I find most of my cards don't have damage counters on them.
My favorite players are the ones who on turn 1 use the coin to use their hero power in Hearthstone, I'm like, I'm gonna win this game. I totally am gonna win this game.
The coin tap for the Warlock.
Oh, coin tap for Warlock is actually, like, you can kind of think of it depending if you're playing like old school Handlock, where you have it all factored in about when you want to get the Mountain Giant out, when you want to get this out, whatever. Like, it all happens. But everyone tries to coin out the Mountain Giant. It's always the funniest thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. So thanks everybody again for submitting questions to Spilled Ink. We do appreciate it, just as always. And yeah, we're gonna stick to the 2-week schedule. We heard some wonderful words from people on Reddit who were saying that they enjoy the podcast, and we appreciate you. But the schedule's gonna remain the same until what? Until there's like,
honestly, like, major spoiler season. Like when they start, like, they're like pumping out the set and the game is like basically playable, then I think it's time, because there's so much content that goes around like the actual aspect of card gaming that you can pod about, but I think it's best saved for last. Like, I think if we were doing podcasts week by week and we did like etiquette, and then we did, supplies and, general strategy, draft strategy, limited strategy, we just, by the time Lorcana releases, like, all that content might burn us and everyone listening out.
Yeah.
So I think that we wait until we get a large amount of the card place and the game is basically playable, and then boom, all that good stuff.
Stay tuned. That's all we'll say. But we're very excited again for getting our hands on the product. We've been playing it, and that's going to be exciting. So we'll be back in 2 weeks. Brand new episode in 2 more weeks. If you haven't already, please follow us here. Give us a 5-star review. That really does so much for us on Spotify and on whatever podcast platform. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a comment. What cards have you played with? What cards are you most excited for so far? What do you think of the rules? Hit them
What's
up
the
over
best
there.
deck?
Yeah, what's the best deck? Brendan already knows, so it's not even a conversation. It's more just you being wrong, apparently. But it's okay.
No, I'm open to it. You just gotta put your money where your mouth is, though.
I'm on your side. Don't you worry about it. You can catch me on Twitter at WatchFlake. You can catch Brendan at BrendanAPG. You can catch the podcast at Podcana. So thank you so much for listening to Podcana, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everyone.